This is a quote by FDR that I absolutely love. He says, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear." What's that something else in our case? Insight, self-awareness, authenticity. So make that choice. All right, so it's kind of a downer to talk about getting this difficult feedback. What's the danger? The danger is we go too far. We become Debbie Downer about ourselves, which is just about the worst thing that can happen. P.S., our unicorns, again, every single one of them had developed a sense of self-acceptance to say, I'm going to learn some things about myself I don't love, but I'm going to accept myself as human and imperfect, and it's okay. And I can do what I want with that feedback. But I want to go a step further, and I'll tell you why. So when we think about a lack of self-awareness, there's basically two buckets you could be in. One bucket, Michael Scott from The Office, are people who overestimate their contributions. They think they're far better than perhaps they objectively are. Does anyone know one of those people? Has anyone worked for one of those people? Or dated one of those people? That's a knowing laugh, I see. But there's another type of person that's unself-aware, and that is he or she who underestimates themselves. If you don't know all the things that make you amazing, how on earth will you be able to be your authentic, exceptional self? Another data point, this is really interesting. So on average, women, compared to men, tends to underestimate how we're doing at work. So consistently, we rate ourselves lower than the way our bosses rate us. And even more fascinatingly, I think, women on average tend to be rated as slightly more effective as leaders than men. So here we are doing better than the average and seeing ourselves as worse off than we objectively are. And I think a lot of that goes back to this idea of, well, I don't want to go too far. I don't want to be seen as arrogant. I have to work on my humility. And I agree with that, 100%. But I think there's a difference between being humble, appreciating our limitations, and underestimating ourselves, which is essentially ignoring our strengths. So for women in particular, we have to remember that knowing your limitations obviously is important. We just talked about it. But in the process of doing that, we should never neglect our strengths. Would you agree? Are you out there? Okay, thank you. So let's talk about how to do this. This tool has a very academic-sounding name, but actually is a very simple concept. The Reflected Best Self exercise involves you asking people that you know. This can actually be more than just your loving critics, but anyone who sees you on a daily basis. What qualities do you appreciate most about me as a person/leader? The bottom line is self-awareness, unfortunately, is not our default state. And the people who spend time and energy honing this meta skill of the 21st century will reap the rewards, plain and simple. That's why it's the #1 step in becoming more awesome. So there's a great quote from a writer named Marianne Williamson, and she says it takes courage to endure the sharp pains of self-discovery, then choose the dull pain of unconsciousness that would last the rest of our lives. Really powerful. So here's what I want you to start thinking about, starting right now. Am I going to keep my rose-colored glasses on and just say above average, above average, above average? Or am I going to try to see myself even more clearly? Am I going to continue on that path? Or am I going to take the time to become what I call braver but wiser? Braver but wiser. And probably out of all the things I'm going to tell you today, this is the most important. Strong, confident, beautiful. A lot of people in the month or so since my book has come out have sent me messages, or they've tweeted me, and they've said, I'm really excited to read your book, or I'm really excited to learn about self-awareness, but I am terrified. And I can completely sympathize with that. I think it's hard to make that choice, right? It takes energy, it takes courage. And that dull pain of unconsciousness is even worse. But here's what I want to tell you. Here's what's on the other side of that journey. And again, I'll give you a couple of tools in a second. People who are more self-aware holistically see themselves. They see themselves clearly for who they are and how they're seen. They understand their gifts. And by the way, becoming more self-aware, I think you'll have more positive surprises than negative surprises. They know what they're great at. They know what they're not so great at. And they compassionately look at themselves and practice forgiveness and grace and don't expect themselves to be perfect. So think about this. If you could know yourself 10% better, what kind of an impact would that have on your career and your life in general? It would really have a huge impact. So I want you to look at this holy grail, this up and to the right on that graph before, as a positive, confidence-building activity. Every once in a while, you are going to not like what you hear. Plain and simple, right, as I learned with my friend Teresa. But no matter what, you're going to have the information you need to control your destiny. What I'm going to do, we'll do it 3 times, is I'll flash something on the screen, and I want you to self-assess how you're doing on that particular thing. Make sense? All right, let's dive in. Job knowledge. In your job knowledge, are you below average, average, or above average? Everyone got an idea? All right, so raise your hand if you place yourself at average in job knowledge. Okay, what about below average? No one, not a single person? What about above average? Good, okay. So 50-50 or so, we'll call it. What kind of a friend are you? How many of you think that you are an average friend? What about below average? None, not a single one? This is statistically impossible. What about above average? Yay. No one wants to say, I'm an average friend, do they? All right, last but not least, this one can get kind of contentious. I'm always scared to drive on the East Coast, personally. How many are below average drivers? Oh, wow, look at that, okay. Maybe there's some regional differences here. What about average? What about above average? Okay. Now, what was the pattern or the trends that we just saw? There is a phenomenon in psychology called, quite fittingly, the above average effect. And what the research on this shows us is that most people feel that they are smarter, better at work, better friends, better drivers, better leaders than they objectively are. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that you're wrong, but it does mean that human beings in general tend to see themselves with rose-colored glasses. How many of you know one of those people that has a delusional sense of their own significance? How many of you have dated one of those people? Oh yes, support group, right? Here's a very interesting data point, I think. Research has shown that the least competent people are the most confident about their abilities and their performance. I'm going to say that again. The least competent people are the most confident about their abilities and performance. What percentage of people do you believe see themselves as self-aware? Any guesses? 80? Good guess. Anyone higher? 85? Okay, prepare to be amazed. This is according to my research. This isn't a number I pulled out of the air. It's based on surveys of thousands of people. 95% of people think they're self-aware. Okay, the next question is what? How many are? So any guesses? What percentage of people actually are, according to my research, self-aware? Oh, you guys are close. It's a little lower. Interesting, 10 to 15%. So the above average effect is at play here, isn't it? Now, if you're like me, if I was sitting in the audience hearing about this for the first time, what I would be sitting there thinking is, well, that may very well be. But I'm definitely in that 10 to 15%.